Welcome to this channel. Before you watch this video, it's a good idea to press the subscribe, like, and share buttons with your friends so that this channel continues to grow. Thank you. I have been driving freight trucks for about 6 years now. Long haul mostly. The kind of job where you spend more nights in the cab than you do in your own bed, where you know the layout of every rest stop between here and 3 provinces over, where the road starts to feel more like home than any building you have ever lived in. I am not someone who gets rattled easily. You cannot be in this job. Long, empty roads, weird hours, strange people at loading docks at 3 in the morning. You get used to it, or you find a different career. This happened about 8 months ago on a delivery route I had never run before. My usual partner Denny had taken a week off for a family thing, so dispatch assigned me a solo run. A large expedition truck, fully loaded, headed to a warehouse distribution point about 14 hours northeast. The roads up there were mostly empty provincial highways cutting through flat land and scattered forest. Nothing unusual on paper. I picked up the truck at 5 in the morning from the depot. Standard pre-trip check, everything normal. The truck was a big white Expedition unit. Newer model, clean cab, good mirrors. I signed the manifest, loaded my bag behind the seat, poured coffee from my thermos, and pulled out of the depot while it was still dark. The first few hours were completely fine. Good road conditions, light traffic, the kind of early morning driving where the world feels quiet and yours, and you remember why you actually like this job. I made good time. I stopped once at a small roadside place for a refill and a bathroom break around hour 3, and chatted briefly with the woman at the counter about the weather further northeast. She said it had been foggy up that way for a few days. I said thanks and got back on the road. The fog started around hour 5. Gradual at first, just a light haze sitting low over the fields on either side of the highway. I slowed down a little and turned on my fog lights and kept going. Fog on a freight run is not unusual. You adjust and continue. But this fog thickened faster than normal, and within about 20 minutes, visibility was down to maybe 40 meters in front of the truck. I slowed down further. I turned on my hazard lights as a precaution, even though there was no other traffic visible in either direction. That was when I noticed the other truck. It was ahead of me in the same lane, far enough that I could only just make out its tail lights through the fog. Red lights, the same height and spacing as a large freight truck. I eased off the accelerator to keep a safe distance and followed at a steady speed. I remember feeling slightly relieved to see another vehicle. Company on an empty road, even at a distance, feels better than nothing. I followed it for about 20 minutes. It maintained a consistent speed, never slowing, never speeding up, just rolling steadily through the fog ahead of me. I tried to make out the company markings on the back, but the fog was too thick. Made just the red tail lights and the vague dark shape of a large truck. Then it stopped. Not gradually, not a slow brake. It just stopped, fully, in the middle of the lane. I hit my brakes hard and came to a stop about 15 meters behind it. My heart was going fast, but I had stopped in time. I sat there with my hazards going, waiting for some kind of movement. A door opening, a hazard light from the other truck, anything. Nothing. It just sat there. I waited for about 3 minutes. Then I picked up my radio and put out a general call asking if anyone was stopped on this stretch of highway, if there was a problem, if they needed assistance. Standard stuff. The radio came back with only static. Not unusual given the location and weather, but not comforting either. I decided to get out and check. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and then stepped down from the cab onto the road. The fog was dense enough that it felt physical. like walking through something. My flashlight beam cut about 10 meters before the fog swallowed it. I walked forward toward the other truck slowly, keeping my light on its tail end. I got close enough to read the back of it. There were no company markings, no logo, no license plate, no reflective strips along the sides the way all road-legal freight trucks are required to have. Just a plain, unmarked dark metal surface, damp with fog. The tail lights were still on, red and steady. But now that I was close, I could see they were not quite the right shape for any truck model I recognized. Slightly too large, slightly too close together. I stood there looking at it for a moment, and then I put my hand on the back corner of the truck to steady myself on the slippery road surface, and I felt it. It was vibrating. Not the idle vibration of a running engine. Something slower, deeper, rhythmic, like a pulse. Like something very large breathing steadily inside a metal box. I took my hand off it and stepped back. I walked back to my truck faster than I had walked forward. I got in, locked the door, and sat there with both hands on the wheel, looking at the red lights ahead of me through the fog. They had not moved. The truck had not moved. I put my truck in reverse. I reversed slowly for about 200 meters, keeping my eyes on those red lights the whole time. They did not follow. They did not move at all. They just sat there in the fog, steady and red, like they had always been there and always would be. When I had enough distance, I swung the truck around on the wide, empty highway, a slow, careful three-point turn that felt like it took forever. And then I was facing the other direction, and I drove. I did not drive fast at first because of the fog and the road conditions. But I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to put my foot down and just go. I kept it controlled, kept it steady, watched my mirrors every few seconds. Nothing behind me, just fog and the white lines of the road appearing and disappearing in my headlights. After about 10 minutes, the fog started thinning slightly. Not gone, but better. I could see maybe 60 meters ahead now instead of 40. I exhaled slowly and reached for my thermos with one hand and took a long drink of coffee and told myself I was fine. Told myself there was probably a reasonable explanation. An unregistered truck, a breakdown, some private transport operation that did not follow standard marking regulations. Sketchy, but not impossible. The pulse I had felt through the metal was probably just an unusual engine idle. Something mechanical I was not familiar with. I almost had myself convinced. Then my GPS rerouted. I had been running the original route the whole time, the one dispatch had loaded before I left. The GPS had been quiet for the past hour because it was a straight highway with no turns. But now it chimed softly, and the screen showed a new route highlighted in blue, taking me off the main highway at the next exit, about 3 kilometers ahead, and onto a smaller regional road that cut northeast through what the map showed as dense forest. I had not touched the GPS. I had not requested a reroute, unless the device had done it on its own. I looked at the new route on the screen. The regional road it wanted me to take was narrow, unmarked as a freight route, and according to the map, it passed through about 40 kilometers of forested land before connecting back to a main highway. Not the kind of road you take a loaded expedition truck down at night in foggy conditions. Not the kind of road you take a loaded expedition truck down in perfect conditions without a specific reason. I canceled the reroute and put the original route back. The GPS accepted it, showed me back on the main highway, continued normally. 30 seconds later, it rerouted again. Same exit, same regional road, same path through the forest. I canceled it again. It rerouted again before I had even finished canceling. I turned the GPS off completely and drove from memory, which on a straight highway is not difficult. exit came up on my left when I stayed in the right lane and drove past it without slowing down. I watched it appear and disappear in my mirrors. Just a standard exit ramp curving off into the fog. Nothing on it. Nothing visible waiting at the bottom of the ramp. I kept going. My phone was mounted on the dash, and I had been using it as a backup navigation device. It had been showing the same route as the GPS the whole trip, no issues. About 5 minutes after I passed the exit, my phone screen lit up on its own. I had not touched it. The navigation app opened by itself and showed me a new route, the same one the GPS had tried to send me on, with a little notification that said, in the standard calm voice of every navigation app, that there was a faster route available, whilst the faster route was 40 kilometers longer than the one I was on. I picked the phone up and closed the app and turned the screen face down on the passenger seat. My radio crackled. Not a voice, not a clear signal. Just a long, low crackle that rose and fell in a rhythm that was almost regular enough to be something. I turned the volume down. The crackle got louder for a moment before I got the volume all the way down. And in that moment, in that brief increase before silence, I heard something inside the static that made me feel cold from my neck to my lower back. It sounded like breathing. Slow, deep, and completely steady. The same rhythm as the pulse I had felt through the metal of that truck. I drove with the radio off and the GPS off and my phone face down and the fog slowly thinning around me. And I focused on the road and the white lines and the distance between where I was and where I needed to be. I told myself I was almost through the worst of the fog. I told myself the devices had malfunctioned because of the weather conditions. I told myself the static on the radio was just static. I told myself a lot of things in that hour. Then the load in the back of my truck shifted. Not a violent shift, not a crash. Just a slow, heavy movement, like something large redistributing its weight. I felt it through the cab, through the seat, through my hands on the wheel. A single slow shift, and then stillness. I had checked the load myself before leaving the depot. Pallets of packaged industrial parts, shrink-wrapped and strapped down on both sides. Properly secured, the kind of load that does not move. I kept driving. The load shifted again. I pulled over. I know that sounds like the wrong decision. Every instinct I had was telling me to keep moving, to put distance between myself and whatever was behind me on that road. But I am a freight driver. A shifting load is a serious safety issue regardless of anything else going on. If those pallets had come loose and the weight distribution in the trailer changed suddenly on a foggy highway, I could jackknife the truck, and that would be the end of everything. So I pulled onto the shoulder, put the hazards on, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel and my heart going faster than I would like to admit. I sat there for about 2 minutes before I got out. The fog was thinner here, maybe 70 or 80 meters of visibility now. The road behind me was empty in both directions. No red lights in the distance, no shapes in the fog. Just empty wet asphalt disappearing into gray on both sides. I grabbed my flashlight and walked around to the back of the trailer and unlatched the doors. Everything was exactly as I had loaded it. Every pallet in its position, every strap tight, every shrink wrap intact. Nothing had moved. Nothing could have moved. I stood there in the open doorway of the trailer, shining my light across the load for a full minute, checking every corner, every strap, every point where something could have come loose. It was all perfect. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to. Not because I was still checking, because I did not want to turn around. The feeling was sudden and very specific. The feeling that if I turned around and looked at the road behind me, I would see something I was not ready to see. I have had gut feelings on the road before. Every long-haul driver does. That quiet alarm that tells you to slow down before a corner or change lanes before a merge. You learn to listen to that feeling. It has kept me out of situations I did not even know were situations until I was already safely past them. This feeling was the same type of feeling, but much louder. I closed the trailer doors, latched them, and walked back to the cab without looking behind me. I got in, locked the door, checked both mirrors before pulling back into the road. Nothing visible in either direction. I pulled out and kept going. For a while, maybe 40 minutes, everything was calm. The fog continued to thin. When I started seeing other vehicles occasionally, a car heading the other direction, a small panel van overtaking me and disappearing ahead. Normal road traffic, the kind of thing that makes the world feel ordinary again. I started to relax in small increments, the tension in my shoulders loosening degree by degree. I stopped at a fuel station just off the highway to fill the tank and use the bathroom. It was a small place, just pumps and a little convenience store attached. One other vehicle there, a sedan with a young couple inside who were eating something from paper bags and not paying attention to anything around them. I filled the tank, went inside, bought a meat pie from the warmer and a bottle of water, and stood at the counter while the teenage boy at the register processed my card. He looked at me while he was waiting for the transaction to go through and said I looked tired. I said, yeah, long run. He nodded and handed me my receipt and then looked past me out the front window toward my truck and asked if I was traveling with someone. I said no, solo run. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not quite read. Then he looked back out the window and said he thought he had seen someone in the passenger seat when I pulled in. He said it clearly, not like he was unsure, not like he was making conversation. Just a plain statement. He thought he saw someone sitting in my passenger seat. I told him there was nobody else in the truck. He nodded slowly and said, "Okay, probably just the reflection of the lights on the glass." He smiled in the way people smile when they want to move past something. I took my food and my receipt and walked back out to the truck. I checked the passenger seat before I opened the door. Empty. My bag on the floor, my phone face down on the seat where I had left it, my thermos in the cup holder. Nothing else. I got in and locked the door and sat there for a moment looking at the passenger seat. The boy inside had been looking through a large glass window at a lit-up forecourt. Reflections on glass at night can do strange things. There was a reasonable explanation. There was always a reasonable explanation. I picked up my phone from the seat. The navigation app was open again. I had closed it hours ago and placed it face down. It was open, and it was showing me the same reroute it had been trying to send me on all night. The regional road through the forest. And the little marker showing my current position was sitting right at the fuel station, accurate to within a few meters. But there was something else on the screen now. Something that had not been there before. Along the regional road through the forest, about halfway along it, there was a small icon I did not recognize. Not a standard navigation icon, not a waypoint or a landmark marker. Just a small dark shape that the app had placed on the road in the middle of the forested section, sitting right on the route it wanted me to take. I zoomed in on it. It was a truck icon. Small, simple, the kind of generic icon navigation apps use to represent large vehicles. But this one was facing the wrong direction on the road. All the other vehicle icons I'd ever seen on navigation apps faced the direction of travel. This one was facing backward, toward the start of the route, toward where I was currently sitting in the fuel station. Like it was waiting. Like it had been waiting for a while, and it knew I had not come yet, and it was still waiting. I closed the app, turned the phone fully off, and pulled back onto the highway. I did not stop again until I reached the distribution warehouse. But what happened in the last 2 hours of that drive is the part I have not been able to explain to anyone. Without them going quiet on me, the same way Marcus went quiet on me when I told him about Alaska. And I need to get it out. I need to write it down the same way I have been writing everything else down. Because keeping it only in my head is doing something to my sleep that I do not like. So here it is. About an hour from the warehouse, on a long, straight, empty section of highway. I looked in my right side mirror and saw the truck again. Same dark shape, same height, same unmarked surface. No company markings, no reflective strips, no license plate visible. It was behind me, maybe 200 meters back, running without headlights through the dark. Just rolling along in the dark behind me, maintaining exactly the same distance, no matter how much I changed my speed. I sped up. It sped up. I slowed down. It slowed down. I held that speed for 10 minutes, and it held that distance for 10 minutes. 200 meters, exactly, like it was measuring. Then I looked in my left mirror, and my stomach turned completely over. The same truck was there, on the other side. 200 meters back on the left, running without headlights, maintaining the same distance. I was driving between two of them, but I put my foot down and I drove the last hour at a speed I am not going to put in writing, and I did not look in my mirrors again until I saw the lights of the warehouse district ahead of me and felt the road widen and saw other trucks and other lights and other people moving around in the loading areas. I pulled into the warehouse, backed into the dock, and sat in the cab for a long time before I got out. When I finally climbed down and walked around to the back of the trailer to check the load before unloading, one of the warehouse guys came out to meet me with his clipboard. He looked at me and asked if I was all right. I said yes, just tired. Long run. He nodded and looked down at his clipboard and then said, without looking up, that the manifest showed a solo run, but the tracking system had logged 2 stops on my route that I had not reported to dispatch. I told him I had only stopped once, at a fuel station. He looked up from the clipboard. He said the system had logged 2 additional stops, both on the regional road through the forest section northeast of the fuel station, the road I had never taken. Page 4. I told the warehouse guy the tracking system was wrong. I said it clearly and calmly, the way you say something when you need the other person to accept it and move on. He looked at me for a moment, then looked back at his clipboard, then shrugged and made a note and said he would flag it as a system error. I thanked him and we got on with the unloading. I helped where I could and mostly stayed close to the other workers. There were 4 of them. Big guys, us, loud, joking with each other the way warehouse crews do at odd hours. I was grateful for the noise. I was grateful for the lights. The warehouse was one of those enormous industrial buildings with ceiling lights so bright the whole interior looked like midday, regardless of what time it was outside. I stayed in that light and let the noise of the forklifts and the pallet jacks and the casual shouting between workers wash over me and tried to feel normal. It took about 90 minutes to unload the trailer. When it was done, I signed the delivery confirmation, got my copy of the paperwork, and walked back to the cab. I had a return journey to make. Empty trailer, same highway, back the way I came. Standard procedure. I sat in the cab for a long time before starting the engine. The warehouse was still busy around me. Trucks coming and going. Workers moving between the loading docks. Forklifts beeping as they reversed. Completely ordinary. But I was sitting in the cab of my truck, about to drive back down the same highway I had come up on, and I was trying to locate somewhere inside myself the part that was okay with that. I called dispatch, told them I was done with the delivery, and was preparing to head back. The dispatcher on duty that night was a woman named Rika, who I had spoken to hundreds of times over the years. Calm, efficient, always on top of things. I asked her if there had been any reports of other freight trucks on my route that evening, anything unusual, any other operators running that highway. She checked and said no, nothing logged, light traffic night on that corridor. I asked her about the tracking system, asked her what it had logged for my route. She pulled it up and read it back to me. Depot, main highway, fuel station stop, warehouse. Clean and straightforward. No additional stops, no detours onto any regional road. I thanked her and said I would check in when I was back at the depot. I sat there for another few minutes after the call. The warehouse guy had said the system logged 2 stops on the regional road. Rika said the system showed nothing like that. Either they were looking at different systems, or one of them was wrong, or something had changed between when he checked and when she checked. I could not make those things fit together neatly, and I eventually stopped trying. I started the engine and pulled out of the warehouse. I want to be honest about the drive back, because I think the honest version is more unsettling than any version I could dress up. The honest version is that nothing happened. The road was clear. The fog had lifted almost completely. I had good visibility the whole way, decent traffic for the hour, and I made good time. I checked my mirrors regularly, and there was nothing behind me that should not have been there. No unmarked trucks, no red lights at the wrong height and spacing, nothing running without headlights. I stopped at the same fuel station on the way back. The teenage boy from earlier was gone. Different person on shift now. An older woman who did not look up from her phone while she processed my card. I bought another coffee and used the bathroom, and stood outside for a moment in the cold air, looking at the highway in both directions. Empty and ordinary. I got back to the depot just before dawn, parked the truck, did my post-trip paperwork, and handed in the signed delivery confirmation. The depot manager on duty that morning was a quiet man named Sobri, who had been doing this job longer than anyone else there. He took my paperwork, flipped through it, and then paused on one page. He looked at it for a moment without saying anything. I asked him if there was a problem. He said no, probably nothing. He turned the page toward me and pointed at a line near the bottom of the vehicle condition report. The section where the driver notes any issues with the truck encountered during the run. I had filled it in at the warehouse. Standard stuff, no mechanical issues. GPS malfunctioned briefly due to weather conditions. Radio interference during foggy section. I had kept it vague and professional. He was pointing at the section below that. The section for pre-trip and post-trip mileage, cost which the depot fills in themselves by checking the odometer before and after each run. The post-trip mileage was higher than it should have been, not by a small amount. By almost exactly the distance of the regional road through the forest section, the one the GPS had been trying to send me on all night, the one I had never taken. 40 kilometers. Sobri said it was probably an odometer calibration issue. Happened sometimes with newer truck models. He would get the mechanics to check it over. He said it in the way the warehouse guy had said system error, the way you say something when you want to close a door and move on. I nodded and said thanks and walked to my car in the employee lot. I sat in my car and did the math 3 times on my phone calculator. Depot to warehouse on the route I drove. A depot to warehouse via the regional forest road. The difference between those 2 numbers matched the extra mileage on the odometer within about 2 kilometers. According to the truck, I had driven through that forest. According to me, I had not. I drove home, showered, and lay down on my bed. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the 2 stops the warehouse system had logged. Thought about what the tracking system would log a stop for. Normally it logs stops when the engine cuts off, when the truck is stationary for more than a few minutes with the ignition off. 2 stops on a road I did not take. Engine off both times. I lay there for a long time thinking about what that meant. If the truck had been on that road, engine off, stopped twice, then either someone else had been driving it, which was impossible because I had been in the cab the entire run, or I'd been driving it and stopped it twice and had no memory of doing any of it. I thought about the blank episodes, the standing still without knowing, the gap between walking and being still in the middle of the road in that flat open country. I had thought that was something that had followed me from Alaska, something that had been working on me slowly over months. But what if it had started earlier than I thought? What if the Alaskan thing and the truck thing were not 2 separate stories? What if they were the same story and I was only now, lying on my bed in the early morning light, beginning to understand that I had been a part of it for much longer than I had realized? I have not taken a solo run since that night. I told dispatch I needed a partner on every route for personal reasons, and they accommodated it without pushing for details. Denny is back, and we have been running together, and everything has been normal. Good runs, clean routes, no malfunctions, no unmarked trucks, nothing on the highway that should not be there. But last week, Denny asked me something that has been sitting in my chest like a stone ever since. We were about 6 hours into a run. Good conditions, easy road, comfortable silence, the way it gets between 2 people who have driven together for years. He was looking out the passenger window at the landscape going past, and he said, without turning toward me, that he had been having these moments lately where he would be doing something and then realize he had stopped and was just standing still without knowing why. He said it casually, like it was a minor thing, like he was mentioning that he had been sleeping badly or eating too much. I kept my eyes on the road. I asked him how long it had been happening. He thought about it for a moment. He said it started around the time he came back from his week off. I did not say anything after that. I just drove. 6 lanes of highway, good visibility, normal traffic, the kind of driving I could do half asleep. I drove, and I thought about what he had just told me. And I thought about where Denny had spent his week off. He had gone camping, up north, near the forest. I have been thinking about how to tell him ever since. I have not figured it out yet. Page 5. I decided to tell Denny everything. Not an edited version, not a careful selection of the parts that sounded least strange. Everything. The shape in the trees outside the cabin in Alaska, the camera that stopped recording, the photo I deleted, the shape in the park, the garage, the therapist's window, the blank episodes, the timer I ran on my phone, the forum posts Marcus had found. All of it. And then the truck run. The red lights in the fog, the pulse through the metal, the GPS rerouting itself. The boy at the fuel station who saw someone in my passenger seat. The 2 trucks running without headlights on either side of me, the extra mileage on the odometer, the 2 stops logged on a road I never drove. I told him all of it, on a long flat stretch of highway 3 days after he mentioned the blank episodes. I talked for almost an hour without stopping. Denny is not the kind of person who interrupts. He listened the whole time, looking forward through the windshield. His hands folded in his lap, his face completely still. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said he believed me. Not in a polite way, not in the way someone says they believe you when they are trying to be kind and move the conversation along. He said it in a flat and serious way that told me he had been sitting with something of his own, and my words had just connected it to something larger than he had been letting himself consider. He told me about the camping trip. He had gone with his brother to a site they had used many times before, a familiar spot near a lake about 4 hours north. Good place, comfortable. Nothing unusual about it historically. The first 2 days were fine. On 3rd day, his brother mentioned that Denny had been standing at the edge of the tree line for a long time the previous night, while his brother was cooking dinner. His brother had called to him twice, and Denny had not responded. And when his brother walked over and put a hand on his shoulder, Denny had turned around, looking completely normal, and said he had just been looking at the trees. Denny had no memory of standing there. His brother had laughed it off. Denny had laughed it off. They finished the trip and came home, and Denny went back to work and tried not to think about it. When the blank episode started happening at home, he told himself it was stress, fatigue, the body doing strange things when it was overtired. He had almost convinced himself of that. Almost. I asked him if anything else had happened on the trip. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said on the last night he had woken up at some point in the early hours and unzipped his tent and looked out. He said the tree line was maybe 30 meters from their campsite. He said there was something standing at the edge of it. I asked him what it looked like. He said tall and thin, completely still with arms that hung slightly too long. He said he had looked at it for what felt like a long time, and then he had zipped the tent back up and gone back to sleep, which was the part that bothered him most when he thought about it later. Not that he had seen something frightening, but that he had looked at it, registered it, and then simply gone back to sleep. Like some part of him had decided it was not a threat. Like some part of him had already accepted it. And we drove for a while without talking after that. Eventually, Denny asked what we were supposed to do about it. I told him about the things I had tried. Moving away, keeping busy, not looking directly at windows at night, the timer on my phone. He listened carefully. Then he asked if any of it had actually worked, if any of it had made the thing go away or stop or leave me alone. I thought about that, honestly, before answering. I said no, not permanently. It had always come back. He nodded slowly, like that was the answer he had expected. We stopped at a rest area about an hour later to stretch and use the facilities. It was a clean, well-lit place with a few other trucks parked up and a small building with vending machines and bathrooms. Normal and busy enough to feel safe. We got coffee from the vending machine and stood outside next to the truck in the cold air drinking it. Denny was looking at the tree line at the edge of the rest area parking lot. Not in an alarmed way, just looking. Then he said something quietly that I have been turning over in my head every day since. He said he did not think it was trying to scare us. I told him I had read something similar online, that someone had written that the fear was a side effect, not the intention. He nodded and said he thought the intention was something more like observation. Like it had found something in us it was interested in, and it was watching the way you watch something you want to understand better. He said he had been thinking about the blank episodes differently lately, not as something being done to him, but as something being practiced through him. Like a frequency being broadcast through a receiver that was not designed for it. And the receiver was doing its best to process something it had no framework for. I looked at him while he said this. He was still looking at the tree line, calm and thoughtful. And I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I asked him when he had started thinking about it that way. He said he was not sure. Recently, it had just started feeling like the right way to frame it. I looked at the tree line then too. Nothing there. Just trees and the darkness between them and the ordinary sounds of a highway rest area at midday. But Denny had been standing at the edge of a tree line with no memory of it 3 weeks ago. And now he was standing here looking at a tree line and talking about frequencies and receivers in a calm, measured voice that did not sound entirely like the Denny I had been driving with for 4 years. I suggested we get back on the road. He agreed without looking away from the trees for a moment longer than felt normal. Then he turned, finished his coffee, crushed the cup and tossed it in the bin, and walked around to the passenger side of the truck entirely normally. Entirely like himself. I watched him do it and told myself I was reading too much into a pause, into a few seconds of someone looking at trees before getting back in a truck. We drove the rest of that run without incident. But when I dropped Denis at his car at the depot that evening and watched him drive away, I felt something I had not expected to feel. Something that was not fear exactly, but sat right next to it. Something that came from the way he had looked at those trees and the way he had talked about frequencies and receivers and the calm certainty in his voice when he said the fear was not the intention. I felt like I had been talking to Denis. I also felt like I had been talking to something that had been spending a lot of time with Denis recently, and I could not tell where one ended and the other began. I called Marcus that night, told him about the conversation. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he asked me if I was still running the timer on my phone. I said I had stopped about a month ago because things had felt normal. He said I should start again. I asked him how he was doing. He said fine, good, busy with work. He said it quickly and then changed the subject, and I let him because I did not have the energy to push. But before we hung up, I asked him one more time, directly, if he had been having any blank episodes. He said no. He said it without pausing. He said it without pausing at all, which is not how a person answers that question when they have genuinely been paying attention to themselves and checking. When you have genuinely been watching yourself for blank episodes and you have not had any. You pause slightly before answering. You do a small mental review. You take half a second. Marcus did not take half a second. I set the timer on my phone before I went to bed that night. Every 20 minutes. I have been running it every day since. 2 days ago, I was on another run with Denis. Short route, 4 hours out and back, where everything was normal the whole day. Good road, easy delivery, normal conversation. On the way back, Denis was driving, and I was in the passenger seat, and I must have drifted off because I woke up suddenly with no idea how much time had passed, and the road outside looked different from where we had been when I closed my eyes. I looked at the clock. 40 minutes had passed. I looked at Denis. He was driving normally, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. I asked him where we were. He told me the name of the stretch of highway we were on, and I pulled up the map on my phone and confirmed it matched. We were on the right road, making good time, everything correct. I asked him if anything had happened while I was asleep. He said no. Smooth run. I had been out for about half an hour. I looked at the clock again. 40 minutes. Looked at the map. Confirmed the location. Looked at Denis. I asked him if we had stopped anywhere. He glanced at me briefly and then looked back at the road and said, "No. Why would we stop? We were making good time." I did not say anything else. I sat with the phone in my lap, looking at the map and feeling the road moving under the truck and trying to breathe normally. 40 minutes of time I could not account for. On a road I could not verify we had stayed on. With a man who I was no longer entirely sure was just my driving partner and nothing else. I have been thinking about what to do for 2 days now. I am still thinking. The timer just went off. I checked what I was doing. I was standing at my window, looking at the tree line at the edge of my neighborhood. I do not remember getting up from my desk. Page 6. I sat back down at my desk and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a long time. Just my hands. Ordinary, familiar. The small scar on my right index finger from a cargo strap incident 3 years ago, the calluses along the palms from years of handling equipment. My hands, attached to me, under my control. I pressed them harder against the desk just to feel the resistance. Then I opened my notebook, the physical one I had started keeping after the blank episodes began, and I wrote down the time and what the timer had caught me doing, and how far from my desk I had been standing when I came back to myself. About 4 meters. The window is 4 meters from my desk. I had crossed that distance without knowing it, and stood there looking at trees without knowing it, and the only reason I knew it had happened at all was a 20-minute alarm on my phone. I wrote it all down, and then I sat there looking at what I had written. The tree line at the edge of my neighborhood is not a forest. It is a row of tall trees along the back fence of a park 2 streets away, visible from my window at a distance. Ordinary suburban trees, the kind you stop noticing after the first week of living somewhere. I had never paid particular attention to them before any of this started. Now apparently some part of me was walking to the window to look at them in the middle of the night. Without telling the rest of me, it was doing it. So I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and tried to think clearly about the situation, the way I would think clearly about a root problem or a logistics issue at work. Lay out what I knew, identify what I did not know, figure out what the next step was. What I knew. It had started in Alaska. A figure at the tree line, watching. Progressively closer appearances. Evidence of something near the cabin while I was away. A photo showing something that had been standing directly behind me. The blank episodes beginning sometime around or after that period. Continued appearances in Oregon, the park, the garage, the therapist's window. The truck run, the extra mileage, the logged stops on a road I did not consciously drive. Denny returning from a camping trip with blank episodes of his own and a changed quality to how he talked about the thing. A calm familiarity that felt like it had been put there rather than arrived at naturally. Marcus answering too quickly when I asked about blank episodes. The timer catching me at my own window in the middle of the night. What I did not know. What it actually was. What it actually wanted. Whether the blank episodes were it doing something to me or it doing something through me. Whether the people around me were being affected independently or whether I was somehow the connection point. Whether moving made any difference at all, given that it had followed me from Alaska to Oregon and seemed to have no difficulty maintaining contact, regardless of geography. Whether there was anything I could do that would actually change anything. I sat with that last one for a long time. Then I did something I had not done in months, and I went back to the forum threads Marcus had found, and I read through all of them again from the beginning, slowly, every post, every reply, every detail. I had read them before in a state of fear and urgency, and I had absorbed them through that filter. I wanted to read them now as carefully and calmly as I could manage. The accounts were all different in their specifics, but similar in their shape. Remote forested areas, a figure at the tree line, gradual approach over time, blank episodes, changes in people nearby, a feeling of being watched that never fully went away regardless of location. But I noticed something I had not noticed before in the earlier readings. Several of the accounts mentioned a specific point in the progression where something shifted. Not a resolution, not a confrontation, and not a moment where the person fought back or ran or found some solution. Just a shift. A point where the quality of the experience changed. The fear did not disappear, but it changed its texture. Became something more like the feeling you have in the presence of something very large and very indifferent, rather than something predatory. Like standing next to a highway and feeling the displacement of air as a truck passes. Not targeted, not personal. Just the side effect of something enormous moving through a space you also happen to occupy. 2 of the people who had written most extensively described this shift, happening around the time they stopped trying to understand what it wanted and started simply acknowledging that it was there, not accepting it in a defeated way, more like the acknowledgement you give to weather. It is raining. You cannot stop the rain. You can stand inside and look out at it, or you can walk through it. But either way, it is raining, and your opinion of the rain does not change the rain. I read that section 3 times. I thought about the last 8 months. The running, the moving, the timers, the deleting of evidence, the careful avoidance of windows, the constant effort to manage something I had no real leverage over. All that energy spent trying to push back against a thing that was not responding to being pushed. I thought about what Denny had said at the rest area, about frequencies and receivers, about something being practiced through a person rather than done to them. I had felt cold when he said it, because it had not sounded like Denny, but sitting here now reading these accounts, I wondered if the coldness had been the wrong response. If maybe Denny, or whatever had been speaking through Denny in that moment, had been offering something closer to accurate than anything I had come up with on my own. I closed the laptop and sat in my quiet kitchen and did something I had not allowed myself to do in a long time. I did not run the timer. I just sat. I let the silence be silence, and I let the night be night, and I kept my eyes on the table in front of me, and I breathed slowly, and I did not check the windows, and I did not make any effort to monitor myself or manage the situation. I just sat in my kitchen like a person sitting in their kitchen, and I let whatever was there be there without fighting it. Nothing dramatic happened. No shapes at the window, no movement in my peripheral vision, no feeling of presence pressing against the walls from outside. Just my kitchen. Just the sound of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic and the slow in and out of my own breathing. I sat there for almost 2 hours. When I finally got up to go to bed, I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not better exactly. Not resolved, but less compressed. Like a pressure that had been building for months had been given a small release, not discharged completely, just adjusted enough that I could breathe at full depth again. I slept that night. Real sleep. Not the fractured, anxious half-sleep of recent months, but actual deep rest. The kind that leaves you feeling heavy and warm in the morning, slow to come back to the surface. When I woke up, I lay in bed for a while before getting up. Mid-off, the morning light was coming through the curtains, and the birds outside were doing whatever birds do in the early part of the day, and everything felt ordinary and manageable. Then my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. Long number, unusual format, not a local code. I almost did not answer it. I get enough spam calls that my instinct these days is to let unknown numbers go to voicemail. But something made me answer it. I pressed accept and held the phone to my ear. Silence on the line. Not dead silence, not a dropped call. The particular quality of silence that means someone is there and breathing but not speaking. I said hello twice. Nothing. Then a voice. Low, slightly distorted by the connection, but recognizable. It took me a moment to place it because I had not heard it in months. It was the person from the forum, Mamas, the one whose email had not bounced, the one I had written to all those weeks ago and never heard back from. They said they had gotten my message. They said they had not replied because they had not known what to say, and they had needed time to think about whether to make contact. I sat up in bed and asked if they were okay. They said that was a complicated question. I asked them what they meant. They were quiet for a moment. Then they said they had been living with this for almost 4 years, that they had tried everything I had tried and some things I had not, that they had moved 4 times across 3 different countries, that it had not made a significant difference. I asked them what had made a difference. Another silence. Longer this time. Then they said something that I have been sitting with all day. and that I wrote down immediately after the call and have read back to myself multiple times to make sure I remembered it correctly. They said the only thing that had made any real difference was when they stopped being the only person who knew. I asked them what they meant by that. They said the thing, whatever it was, seemed to operate most effectively in isolation, in the space between a person and everyone around them. The gap created by the impossibility of explaining what was happening to anyone who had not experienced it. That gap was where it had the most room to work. They said once enough people around them knew, really knew, not believed in a polite, supportive way, but knew because they had experienced some part of it themselves. The quality of the thing changed. Not gone, not resolved, but different. Like it lost some kind of advantage when the isolation closed. I thought about Denny, about Marcus, about the therapist who had looked past me at the window and then never mentioned it again. I asked the person on the phone how many people it had taken. They said they were not sure there was a specific number, but more than one or two. Enough that the knowing was shared widely enough to not feel like a secret anymore. I thanked them. They said good luck in a way that sounded like they meant it specifically and heavily. Then the call ended. I sat in my bed in the morning light for a long time after that. Then I opened my laptop, and I started writing all of this down. Not in my private notebook, not in a locked document. Here, where people can read it, where it stops being something that only I know and becomes something that other people know too. I do not know if it will make a difference, but I am doing it anyway. If you have read this far, you know now. That is the point. That is the whole point. 3 days after I posted everything online, people started responding. Not the responses I expected. I had braced myself for the usual things you get when you share something like this publicly. Disbelief, jokes, people telling me I needed therapy, people asking if I was trying to promote something. There were some of those, but buried underneath them, in the comments and in my messages, there were others. Quiet ones. People who wrote carefully and seriously and said things like, "I have never told anyone this but," or "I thought I was the only one," or simply, "This happened to me too." Bess and I read every single one of them. The details varied. Different countries, different landscapes, different circumstances. Some of them had encountered it in forests the way I had. Some had encountered it in other remote places, open fields at night, coastal cliffs, the edges of industrial areas with tall fence lines. The geography was different, but the shape of the experience was always the same. A figure, still and watching. Gradual approach over time, blank episodes, changes in people nearby, the impossibility of explaining it to anyone who had not been through it, and the particular exhaustion of carrying it alone. Several people mentioned the delivery, the feeling that it was moving something from itself into you incrementally, the way you move cargo in stages rather than all at once. Small loads, regular intervals, building up over time without you noticing until the weight was already considerable. One person, a woman who said she had been living with it for 6 years, wrote me a long message that I have saved and read several times. She said she had worked out that the blank episodes were not memory loss exactly. She said if she sat very quietly immediately after coming back to herself and did not let her conscious mind rush in to fill the gap, she could sometimes catch the edge of what had been happening in the blank time. Not a full picture, just an impression. And the impression she consistently got was not of standing still. It was of moving, of walking through a space that was not the space her body was physically in, of being somewhere else while her body stood in one place like an empty vehicle left running. She said she thought it was practicing distance through her, learning how to be in a place without actually being there. using her nervous system the way you use a radio tower to extend a signal further than it could reach on its own. I thought about the 2 stops logged on the forest road I had never driven. I thought about the extra mileage on the odometer. I thought about sitting in the passenger seat next to Denny and waking up 40 minutes later on a stretch of highway I could not account for. I thought about what she had said about moving through a space that was not the space her body was physically in. I wrote back and asked her if she had ever found any evidence of where she had been during the blank times. Any physical evidence? Anything logged or recorded by a device? And anything that suggested her body had actually gone somewhere while she was not in it? She replied within an hour. She said yes. She said the first time she found evidence, she had not believed it and had spent weeks trying to explain it away. She had woken up from a blank episode in her living room to find mud on her shoes that had not been there before. The specific red clay mud from a forested area about 12 kilometers from her house. She had driven out there the next day and found the area and stood in it and looked at the ground and confirmed the mud matched exactly. She said after that, she started checking herself carefully every time she came back from a blank episode. Over the following months, she found evidence of other places, soil types that matched areas she had never consciously visited, pine needles in her pockets. Once, a small piece of bark from a tree species that did not grow anywhere near where she lived, that she had eventually identified through an online plant database as native to a region 400 kilometers north. She said she had eventually stopped checking, not because the evidence stopped being there, but because knowing where her body had been while she was not in it was worse than not knowing. I sat with that for a long time. Then I checked my shoes. I keep them by the front door, 2 pairs, the work boots and a pair of everyday shoes. I had not been anywhere unusual in the past several days. Depot, home, the grocery store 2 blocks away, the fuel station around the corner. Ordinary pavement, ordinary city surfaces. The everyday shoes were fine. Clean soles, nothing unusual. The work boots had something on the left heel. A smear of dark soil, slightly damp still, with small flecks of something organic in it that looked like decomposed leaf matter. The kind of material you find on a forest floor. Not pavement, not city soil, not anything from any surface I had walked on in the past week. I took a photo of it. Then I sat on the floor next to my front door for a while, the boots in my hands, looking at the soil on the heel and trying to locate inside myself something that felt like surprise. I could not find it. I think part of me had already known. Had known since the extra mileage, had known since the logged stops, had known since the woman's message landed, and something in me had recognized it immediately and specifically in a way that pure sympathy could not account for. You recognize things that have happened to you, or you recognize them in your body before your brain catches up. I put the boots down and went and washed my hands and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. I thought about what the person on the phone had said, that the thing operated most effectively in isolation, that sharing the knowing closed some gap it needed to function. I had posted everything online and people had responded, and the knowing was spreading outward in small increments, and I had felt something shift slightly in the days since. A marginal reduction in the weight of it, a small increase in clarity. But the boots told me it was still happening. Sharing the knowing had changed the quality of the thing, but it had not stopped it. I needed to think about that differently. I went back to the online responses and read through them again more carefully, looking for anyone who had reported that the sharing had actually stopped the blank episodes, rather than just changed how the experience felt. Out of everyone who had written to me, only 2 people mentioned anything close to stopping, and both of them described something similar. Not just sharing the knowing with other people, actually being in sustained regular contact with other people who had experienced it directly. Not people who believed them, not people who were supportive, but people who had their own first-hand experience of it and who were actively comparing notes and staying in contact. There was a difference between people knowing about it and people who knew it, sharing the knowing between themselves. I thought about that difference for the rest of the evening. Then I wrote a message to everyone who had contacted me with their own experience. Not a general reply, individual messages to each of them. I told them what I had found on my boot. I told them what the woman had told me about the blank episodes and the physical evidence. I asked them if any of them had checked themselves the same way. I asked them if any of them were still experiencing blank episodes. I asked them if they wanted to stay in contact, regularly, in an ongoing way, and compare what was happening to each of them over time. By the next morning, I had responses from 11 of them. All 11 said yes. 3 of them mentioned they had checked themselves after reading my message and found evidence they could not account for. Soil, plant material, and in one case, a small abrasion on the palm of one hand, consistent with contact with rough bark. We set up a group, a private one, just us, where we could share updates and check in with each other regularly. Where the knowing was not just public and diffuse, but concentrated and active between people who were all inside the same experience. The first day the group was active, I had no blank episodes. The second day, no blank episodes. Third day, nothing. I did not want to read too much into 3 days. 3 days is not a pattern. 3 days is barely a data point. But I kept the timer running anyway. And I kept checking, and I kept posting in the group, and the others kept posting. And we built up this small, careful record of what was happening to each of us day by day. By the end of the first week, 7 of the 11 reported a reduction in blank episodes. Not 0, but fewer and shorter when they happened. I was one of the 7. Denny called me on day 5. I had not yet told him about the group. He called to tell me he had read what I posted online. He said he had read all of it twice, and he sat with it for 2 days before calling because he wanted to be sure of what he was going to say before he said it. He said he was sure now. He said he wanted to be in the group. I added him. That evening, after I added Denny, I sat at my desk for a while, not doing anything in particular. The timer was running. The group chat was open on my laptop with people posting their daily updates. Denny had already made his first post, short and factual, describing his blank episodes and their frequency and the conversation at the rest area and what he could and could not remember from recent weeks. I read his post and felt something I had not expected to feel in the middle of all of this. Something close to gratitude. Not for what was happening, not for any of it, but for not being the only person in the room with it anymore. For the specific relief of other people looking at the same thing from different angles and reporting back what they saw. For the way that shared attention seemed to change the thing being attended to. The way observation changes the observed, the way a light turned on in a dark space changes what the dark space contains. The timer went off. I checked what I was doing. I was sitting at my desk, writing this, fully present, both hands on the keyboard, aware of every second. I saved the document and posted it to the group. Then I posted it here, because the more people who know, the smaller the space it has to work in. And right now, making that space as small as possible is the only thing any of us have found that makes any difference at all. So now you know too. And if any part of this felt familiar to you, if any detail landed somewhere specific in your body rather than just your mind, if you found yourself recognizing something rather than simply reading something, then you already know why I am asking you to do one thing before you close this page. Tell someone. not to warn them. Just so the knowing is not only yours. Just so you are not alone in the room with it. That is all. That is everything.